If you haven't watched part 1 of this 2-part series, please go and listen to part 1 first before continuing listening to this part. Thank you. Okay, I'll continue here. About cultural hoovering. The purpose of cultural hoovering is to trap the population. That's what it's about. Think about it this way. When a reprobate, whether you call him or her a narcissist or sociopath, whatever, when a reprobate hoovers you, I'm going to use the pronoun he now, he wants to trap you into his relief seeking. If you had, for example, an abusive father that suddenly wants to reconnect with you, why does he want to reconnect with you? Because he left the family years back, but his new wife dumped him because the new wife didn't want to deal with his BS. So now he wants to feel sympathy. And he goes back to his quote-unquote first family with expectation they will take him back so that he's relieved from facing the consequences of his will. So when the narcissist, when the reprobate hoovers, he wants to trap you because he only perceives you as a tool to advance his will. To the reprobate, it's all about them. It's never about someone else. It's all about them not being mentally challenged. And them hoovering you, coming back, is only to trap you again into being used by them as a source of supply. Reprobates only want narcissistic supply and only want to be enabled. That's what it is with those folks. So we know that when an individual narcissist comes back, it's not because they changed, even if they may claim that they've changed or they're working on it or they're so-called sorry. It's not true. They just don't want to be faced with consequences of what they did. So now they want you back again to drain you so they could feed themselves. It's all about them. When cultural hoovering occurs, it is to trap the whole population. Because it goes like this. Something quite bad or out of line happened in a community. That thing that happened could have been prevented easily. But now that it happened, there's no way back. But the people in the community that are stakeholders of what happened don't want to be charged by others in the community due to what happened. They don't want to face it. Because once they have to face it, then they also need to comply with justice. And to comply with justice, it will not be beneficial to them according to their terms. Because their terms are they want to be left alone. And once you have to comply with justice, you're never allowed to be left alone because it's your obligation to comply with justice. Especially if the justice you're complying in refers to a harm you contributed to. So you have a large amount of people in a community that don't want to take responsibility. They don't want to face themselves. So they begin to do a lot of quote-unquote good things in the community. Not because they are good people. Not because they want the best for the community. They do it so that if one day their dirt appears, you either don't want to believe it, because that would mean you need to challenge the status quo. So you would just brush it off. Or you wouldn't dare to challenge them because, hey, they've done so many good things to the community, so you owe them a lot of thanks. So if you don't want to be blackmailed like that, so you'll think, you know what, I'm not going to speak out about this, neither I'm going to require justice for this because it will cost me a lot. And of course, you have those around you that just want to be left alone also, so you don't dare challenging status quo because you may have common folks turning on you and endangering your life. That is the purpose of cultural hoovering. And to hide their dirt, they often also become enraged at certain criminals. And their rage against criminals may enable them to appear as righteous people. They're self-righteous, but they're considered righteous people by the community. But is this true? It is not true. It's all a hoax. Look, you have people that are upset with crime, legitimately, because crime harms the community. It harms trust between the members, and once the trust is gone, well, things escalate. So there are people that are naturally concerned about crime. But those people that are naturally concerned also realize, just hold on a minute, crime doesn't just happen. We need to face this as a community and deal with it. Those are people that are naturally concerned. And then you have folks who are only concerned with crime because it hinders their ease. So their concern is narcissistic. It's all about them. Now, both of those people, the one that's naturally concerned and the one that's narcissistically enraged at crime, they both may have a similar opinion concerning crime. They may even be members of the same political party or going to the same church. But when it comes down to it, the one that's naturally concerned will be flexible enough to admit that he also needs to watch his contribution. He also needs to participate in solution. The one that's narcissistically enraged at crime will never admit that he or she is part of the community and therefore responsible for whatever works out in the community. You can't be individually responsible for what all the individual members of the community do. That's not possible, but you are responsible for your contribution to the bigger whole. So if your contribution does not contribute to solutions nor to the well-being of the community, that means that your contribution does the opposite. It's one of the two. But those that are narcissistically enraged at crime, they want to be in the community and they want benefits from the community. But oh dear, don't talk to them about natural obligations towards the community. They don't want to hear about it. They want to be left alone. They want to be left alone. They don't want to be bothered. But at the same time, you ought to be bothered by their demand of wanting to be left alone, and you need to make sure they are at ease while being left alone. So you have the obligations, they have the rights, and you have to shut up and take it. They don't want to hear anything. Because if they hear anything, they are frustrated. They don't want to deal with frustration, so they act out. And when they act out, when they attack, and people get hurt, people are harmed, it's not their fault. Because others makes them do it. That's how reprobates are. But if the reprobate didn't act out yet, it's hard to see that it's a reprobate. And don't get things wrong here. Any individual that's placed in very oppressive circumstances may lose it. Not because they're bad people, but because if you endanger someone long enough, it will go wrong. Psychologists know this, psychiatrists know this, and the legal system in the world know this also. Just because someone snapped doesn't mean someone was a reprobate. But it is true that when reprobates have no option but to face their frustration, that they escalate. So there are times the authorities will appease the reprobates by locking up someone that's innocent. Why? Because then the reprobates are at ease and they won't escalate. Because once the reprobates escalate, things go terribly wrong. So cultural hoovering is when the reprobates want to blackmail the community, that includes you, into not holding them accountable. And the best way to blackmail you is to involve you in their crime. It can be that in a community there is a lot of child molestation going on. And many folks are aware of it, but you just don't deal with it. some of those victims become older and they turn into drug addicts or other type of dysfunctional people. So when you have so many dysfunctional people in a community, you begin to ask, how is this possible? Where do those people grow up? And the people that enabled the toxic situation of that community, they'll feel threatened because they now have something to explain, and they can't explain it. And once it becomes open and clear that those people were just cowards, they don't want to take their natural responsibility seriously, they may become the target of anger from other folks. Which is justly so. They don't want to deal with all of this. So they may begin. There may be some calls that then comes with some project to help drug dealers. I mean, not drug dealers, but drug addicts and also drug dealers to solve the crime problem. But this project claims they want to solve the drug problem. It's not true. They want to keep drug addicts dysfunctional, and they want to keep drug dealers in the criminal world. Why? Because they will use this dysfunction as an excuse to not be responsible. Because then they will say, you know what? We have these rehab clinics all over the country, but those drug addicts remain drug addicts. You know what? It's none of our fault. It has to do with those people. They're just evil people. They're just bad, blah, blah, blah. And of course, there are drug addicts or evil people. I understand that. But look beyond. When in a community a dysfunction persists, then it's only persisting because that community enables that dysfunction. And because you're part of that community and you collide with it, you are also contributing to that dysfunction. And that is the blackmail that reprobates will use in keeping you trapped in a cycle of violence. That is cultural hoovering. And here's one thing you need to understand. There is no such thing as informed consent in the spiritual. Informed consent, just like privacy, are human imaginations that don't exist. There is no such thing as privacy in the spiritual because it doesn't exist. There is also no such thing as informed consent. Consent does exist, that's a natural thing, but informed consent in spiritual doesn't exist. You're either in line with Christ, and therefore you're safe operating in His power, or you're stuck with the paranormal. And being stuck in the paranormal can either be that you're involved in the paranormal, whether it's in wizardry, witchcraft, or sorcery, or whatever, or you're just part of society, and those that are involved in the paranormal have a hold on you. So there is no such thing as informed consent. You have the power, and you have the counterfeit power. And if you're not in the power, you're trapped by the counterfeit power one way or the other. So it's not about you asking for it. It's not about you giving permission for it. It has to do with, are you in the real or not? Are you in Christ or not? The reason I'm talking about cultural hoovering is because this evil is so common that folks don't even notice it exists. Look, when you're part of a community, you're part of a community, okay? So that you obey traffic signs, that you say, yes sir, yes ma'am, that you pay with the currency of the community, there's nothing wrong with any of that. But beware with complying with the cycles of violence of a community. This is why Christ told us not to be unequally yoked with unbelievers. This is why Christ told us not to be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of our mind. So, that's it for now. Keep agreeing with Christ and be at peace.